Get away. Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. I've got dogs here wanting treats. They knew I was going to go on. They waited for me to go on. It terrifies me because they're over by my mic wires. And Gilbert and Tallulah don't understand electronics, so I must get them away. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to Robservations, the show about something. This is Robservations number 271. Gilbert, you must go. 271. This is, of course, the show about something. And I'm your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. I'm sorry for yesterday's hiatus, but you know what? I had Hollywood knocking on my door, and I had work that needed to be done, which was true. Girls and boys, you got to go. It's time for the dogs to go. Anyway, welcome, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. We've got a great show today. I'm very excited to talk about this. I've been wanting to talk about what I'm going to talk about all week long, but I haven't had the opportunity to do so, but I'm going to do it today. First of all, I have to remind everyone that Robservations is, of course, brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in PGS for this community, the Post-Geek Singularity community, and you get 20% off your order. Let me wipe my brow because, you know, it's going to be 88 degrees here in Pasadena today, and we didn't turn the air conditioning on. It's crazy, crazy hot. So many of you know, I tend to, when I delve into political issues, it's not usually from a perspective of being angry about something necessarily. And when it comes to the very mandate of this channel, what do I say after every show? I say, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And you've heard me bang on about superficial diversity and how I don't like that. And that the whole point to me is we need to concentrate more on the experiences of people, that the experiences of people are really what's important. And if somebody grows up, say, a different ethnic minority, if in your country, they have a different experience of life because of that. It's not really important about the color of their skin as much as it is about what does the color of their skin or their international ethnicity have to do with how they've been treated and what their experience of life is. That's what's important. You have to understand the experiences of people and what those experiences mean to them and what those experiences mean to the rest of us, the world at large. And sharing those experiences and understanding those experiences are really what's most important. And that's what I've always said. And I believe in a meritocracy. You know, there's a lot of people that were complaining or that Ivy League schools, Harvard, for instance, there's an inordinate amount of Asian students, people of Asian descent, applying and getting in or not getting in. And my whole thing is, you know what? Let the best people in. And if you're not going to do that, or if you are going to do that, the people that aren't getting in need to step up their game. That's how human civilization has worked for a long time. And I do believe in that. Ultimately, I do believe in a meritocracy, and that might not be the most affirmative action way of thinking about things. But you know what? If you go back far enough, life has been tough for everyone at one point or another. So, but that's my general feeling about things. I also believe that our greatest resource on this planet is one another, and to squander that resource in any way, shape, or form is one of our greatest shortcomings as human beings. That everybody has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And this story that I have to bring you has been making my gums bleed all week. And I'm very upset about it, to be honest, because, you know, there are things that come along. We hear a lot about, especially watching Damon Lindelof talk about developing the Watchmen show. And Damon Lindelof was talking about how when his friends who are TV writers get together, they try and out-woke each other. Well, in my mind, something arose this week that demands that Hollywood, I would love to have seen Hollywood get behind this and demand justice. Demand justice. And it really bothers me that I have not seen many people up in arms about this, because when it comes to diversity, when it comes to, well, not necessarily affirmative action, but when it comes to action and injustice and especially hearing new voices. Everybody's always saying in Hollywood, oh, yes, we're very liberal. Well, here's a story where I want to say that the entertainment community so far, at least this week, has failed miserably. And I am incredibly disappointed in not only what has happened, but the lack of outcry from people that should be screaming bloody murder. So here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Nigeria, the country, the African nation of Nigeria, submitted to the Academy Awards a movie called Lionheart, starring and directed by a woman. The film has been disqualified for competing in the Academy Awards. And now the Academy Awards have sort of rebranded the Best Foreign Film Award to Best International Film. But according to their rules, their bylaws, Best International Film means also apparently non-English movie. Now, what does this have to do with a film from Nigeria? Well, guess what the language spoken in Nigeria actually is? The national language of Nigeria. Want to hazard a guess? English. It's English. So this film, by anybody's stretch, by anybody's, whatever metric you want to look at this Nigerian film, it's an international film coming from Nigeria, a country that has had a burgeoning film industry for the last quarter century. And while we perhaps Nigerian films are not running, we don't think of them off the top of our heads, one day we're probably going to. And this could have been the first one. Well, actually, it is going to be the first one because this story is going to be told. So this film was not allowed into Oscar contention because it's predominantly shot in English. This movie was entirely made in Nigeria by Nigerians. And it has been disqualified from the Academy Awards. Now, here's the thing. Here's what really, it makes me want to scoop out my eyeballs with a teaspoon. What we are missing in this day and age, what I find, I see the vitriol that's spread across the internet. I see everyone's anger, especially in our film community, but common sense, the death of common sense. Now, I understand if you have rules laid down about something that, you have to follow them. But what's really interesting is, are you a legalist or do you follow the spirit of the law? Now, we in America, we sort of forget colonialism and how empires like the British Empire colonized, or France colonized other countries hundreds of years ago, and those countries wound up speaking, well, the conquerors' languages. And it just became a thing. We in America, we're not as aware of that as much as we want to think that we're all aware. We're not as aware as we should be. And in this case, Nigeria is submitting a film directed by a woman that stars this woman. This should be the kind of movie that Hollywood should be embracing. It's the kind of movie that's like, yes, a new voice, a new country. Not a new country, but a country that's we're seeing their emergent film industry to the point where they have a film that they believe. Now, I don't know if this is the first film that Nigeria has submitted. I'm not sure. It might be in this article that I'm about to read. But as a film fan, I think this is exciting news that there's a movie coming out of Nigeria that I haven't seen about a woman's experience that I don't know. This is the kind of thing that I live for. Honestly, this is what art is for. Art is for sharing an experience. And the great thing about movies is, the great power of movies is that it doesn't matter what your income level is. It doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are. It doesn't matter what color or ethnicity you are or what gender you identify with. When you sit in a movie theater and when those lights go down, we're all equal. We're all members of the audience. And we're all in the thrall of the filmmakers that decide to tell their stories up on that big screen. And one of the great things about movies is they're one of the greatest mediums to communicate ideas and tell us about other cultures and other people that we might not know. So a film coming out of Nigeria with this kind of a pedigree is exactly the kind of movie that the Academy, the Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, are there to celebrate. Now, somebody should do their research. Somebody should say, oh, well, we're going to disqualify this. It's not like Nigeria. Like, what do we think in our ignorant ways that we have to speak some African language and African dialect for a movie? Yes. You know why? Because we're dumb. We're stupid. That these things should be looked at on a case-by-case basis by somebody that's paying attention. If a movie comes in from Nigeria and it's predominantly in English, somebody would say, that's interesting. Before we decide to summarily dismiss this movie, why don't we do a little bit of research? And when you find out that, yes, wow, you mean there's other countries in the world that use English as their first language rather than just the United States? Well, then our stupid laws or stupid bylaws or stupid rules about what films can and can't be allowed in the Academy Awards, they were ill-considered. They were decided upon by people that didn't have all the pertinent information, because they should have had in the list of they should have had exceptions. These films are allowed, films from Nigeria, because they are predominantly English. So our rules accept these films. It should have been thought of when they came up with that. Now, would I say this law is racist? No. I think this law is ignorant, or these rules are ignorant and stupid, because they are based on a fundamental lack of understanding about the rest of the planet that we live on, which so often Americans are guilty of doing. Now, I'm not putting down all Americans. I'm an American. I love being an American. I think America's truly a wondrous place. However, we owe it to our fellow human beings that live all over this great planet of ours, this fragile, amazing planet, to do a little bit more research, especially if we have emergent industries and we have voices that aren't traditionally heard from very often. When they submit films, maybe somebody should go, hey, let's give these films a little special consideration. If only because we don't get many films from Nigeria submitted to the Academy Awards. So why don't we take a moment? And rather than be so quick to snap our fingers and disqualify such an entry, why not spend a couple of minutes perhaps Googling Nigeria, finding out about their film industry? I mean, somebody made a movie in Nigeria and took the time to submit it to the Academy Awards. I mean, I would look into Nigeria's, how many times have they submitted to the Academy Awards? Have we had this problem in the past? Did anybody do anything but give a cursory consideration to this? Anyway, that's what has bothered me. Now, one of the great joys of this channel is I've got moderators. And one of my favorite things to do, and I don't really respond, I just like to dip in and watch, the moderators have an ongoing Twitter stream on Twitter where they communicate with each other about this show, about all of you, about Vesna and Willow Yang. And I'm telling you, and by the way, it's very respectful and it's very interesting. And I find out a lot about the show that I miss out on during the live streams, because I can't keep up with the live feed. But sometimes my moderators are dropping articles and things they think are worthy of sharing on the show. And this article that I would like to read, I guess it comes from an NBC News. It's got the NBC logo, and NBC News Think, opinion, analysis, and essays. Now, this article was written by a woman who, by the way, I'm going to read this article. I'm going to apologize to everybody because I'm going to brutalize all of the names. But I wanted to get the name right of the woman that wrote this article. And normally when I read articles, they're in trade papers, or I have not read an article from this place. I know it's an NBC affiliate, or it's Think, Opinion, Analysis, and Essays. But because this mattered to me, I reached out. I decided to read this article a couple hours ago. And I reached out to the woman who wrote it, and I asked if I could get a pronunciation on her name. because I wanted to get her name right. I'm going to brutalize all the other names because they're mostly African names, Nigerian names, and I am not up on my, even though it's English, the sounds, the way that words are laid out are tough. But this article is written by Aramide Tinubu. Aramide Tinubu is her name, and I want to thank her, first of all, for responding so quickly and allowing me to, well, at least say her name correctly. Aramide Tinubu. And by the way, Aramide Tinubu is now perhaps my favorite name. If I had a daughter, I think I would have to name her Aramide. Now, normally, when I see names of people that or things I don't know how to pronounce, I'll go online and listen to those pronunciation guides. Well, it's becoming increasingly apparent to me that going there, you might have three completely different pronunciations, and Aramide was no exception. There's a Dutch pronunciation, there's a German pronunciation, but thank you, Aramide, for coming back to me and telling me how to pronounce your name. So I'm going to read her article, and again, I apologize. I apologize in advance for butchering all these names. The Oscars disqualified Lionheart because Nigerians speak English in it, just like in Nigeria. A Nollywood movie without anyone speaking English wouldn't be authentic to the director's vision. Why should she be punished for colonialism's reach? By Aramide. On Monday, Aramide Tinubu. On Monday, November 4th, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences announced their devastating decision to disqualify Nigeria's entry in the Best International Film category. Geneviève Nagi's feminist and emotionally searing Lionheart from the 2020 Oscars race. Apparently, the film had not been vetted by the Academy's International Feature Film Award Executive Committee prior to the October 7th announcement of qualifying films when it was first named. The Academy, which has recently changed the name of the category from Best Foreign Language Film to Best International Film, disqualified Lionheart under the rule that Best International Film entries must boast a, quote, predominantly non-English dialogue track, unquote. It should be noted that in addition to English, the Nigerian language of Igbo is also spoken throughout Lionheart, Netflix's first original film from Nigeria. A female trailblazer for African cinema, Naji began her career in Nigeria's burgeoning film industry, known colloquially as Nollywood, as a child star on soap operas and in commercials, moving into films as first an actor, then a producer, and now a director. Lionheart, her directorial debut, follows Daisy Naji, a whip-smart businesswoman who is desperately trying to save her father's transport company in the wake of his illness and her fraught relationship with her uncle. But perhaps more important than the plot or its talented director star is an understanding of the history of Nigerian filmmaking and Britain's century-long rule over the country. Though Nollywood is now one of the top film industries in the world, it only got its start in the 1960s, when Nigerian film pioneers like Ola Balogun realized in the post-colonial era that an entire country of people with a rich culture and traditions were looking outward toward Hollywood for their entertainment. Nigeria has always been pulsing with its own stories to tell, along with Balogun, Herbert Agunde, Jab Adu, Moses Alaya, and Eddie Ugboma became the first generation of Nigerian filmmakers, setting the foundation for an industry that would explode in the 1990s. Reeling from the imprint of colonialization and teetering under the weight of decades of government instability, a ban on imports, and a massive economic crisis, Nigerian filmmakers, artists, and entrepreneurs had to find new ways to make movies and distribute them without the high overhead costs of traditional film. Using VHS systems, which were cheaper and more widely available, producer Kenneth Mbui launched Nigeria's home video industry in 1992 with his first straight-to-video movie, Living in Bondage. From there, cinema in Nigeria became a nearly $700 million a year phenomenon. with some 45 films debuting in Nigeria each week. Straight-to-video movies still make up a massive part of Nigerian film production. However, distribution has expanded well beyond its early days and into cinema houses and onto streaming platforms like YouTube and Netflix. Kemi Adediba's 2006 The Wedding Party became the highest-grossing Nigerian film of all time until its 2017 sequel, Naya Akinmulayan's Akinmulayan, The Wedding Party 2, Destination Dubai, broke that record. Both films, which, like Lionheart, showcase English, Yoruba, and Igbo dialogue, are currently streaming on Netflix. Again, I apologize for my bastardization of everybody's name. With so much cinema pouring out of Nigeria, film producer Alex Iyengo defined Nollywood films as, quote, the totality of archives taking place in the Nigerian film industry. The totality of activities taking place in the Nigerian film industry, be it English, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, Sakiri, Edo, Efik, Ijaw, Orobo, or any of the other over 300 Nigerian languages. Nigeria's Movies Like Nigeria reflects all of the country's languages, including English, the languages of the British colonizers who first came to Lagos in 1851. That is why the Academy's decision to disqualify Lionheart from the Best International Film category is incredibly offensive to Nigeria, Nollywood, and the dozens of countries globally whose official language is English, not because they chose it, but because it was chosen for them. Hollywood is ignoring the global history of colonization and how it has shifted, shaped, and profoundly affected cultures and communities throughout the world. See, to me, this is exactly what diversity is all about. Understanding this kind of thing, understanding the experiences of people. It's not about their color, it's about their experiences. Color is obviously a part of it, but it's the experiences of the Nigerian people that are important here. And what they experienced was, as we just read, colonization. And it changed their culture forever, making English their language of choice, even though it's not like that developed on its own in Nigeria. On Twitter, filmmaker Ava DuVernay asked, to the Academy, you disqualified Nigeria's first ever submission. Okay, it's the first ever submission for Best International Feature because it's in English, but English is the official language of Nigeria. Are you barring this country from ever competing for an Oscar in its official language? Well, Ava DuVernay, who I have a horrible crush on, by the way, is absolutely right. And leave it to her to bring this to the attention of Twitter. Najani tweeted, I'm the director of Lionheart. This movie represents the way we speak as Nigerians. This includes English, which acts as a bridge between the 500 plus languages spoken in our country, thereby making us #OneNigeria. She added, quote, it's no different to how French connects communities in former French colonies. We did not choose who colonized us. As ever, this film and many like it is proudly Nigerian. I mean, if ever a movie should be considered for the Academy Awards, I would think that this should be, especially in light of the burgeoning Nigerian film industry, what it represents in terms of getting voices out on the world stage that have not been heard around the world. I mean, what are movies for but this very thing? But, you know, it bothers me. You know, if this film, what if it were picked up? Well, it's going to be on Netflix, thank God. So I'll be able to see it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. But this is what movies are all about. And to see this film disqualified, to not be able to hear these voices, to not be able to experience other stories that I wouldn't necessarily ever get to hear, this is exactly why I love the movies. As people know, I grew up going to the Seattle International Film Festival starting in 1980 when I was I just turned 13. And I loved international cinema growing up. I watched cinema from all over the world. And every year, come May, it was a smorgasbord of international voices. I saw films that are deeply perplexing to me, even to this day. And I know how much it meant to me as a kid growing up and seeing the experiences that people had. And I think this, if you want to call me a social justice warrior or whatever, this is the kind of thing that I would get behind, that I would rally behind and say, you know what? The people in Nigeria have stories to tell you have yet to hear or see on a movie screen. All you have to do is listen. But apparently, well, you can if you have Netflix, but the Academy's not going to listen. The Board of Governors is not going to listen, and yet they should. It's additionally curious to consider how Lionheart's acquisition by Netflix may have affected the Academy's decision. As the global streaming service has garnered more and more traction, making its way into esteemed award shows like the Golden Globes, British Academy Film Awards, and the Academy Awards, Hollywood has done everything in its power to keep the streaming giant at bay. Since Netflix's first feature-length Oscar contender in 2015, the Idris Elba-led Beasts of No Nation, the streaming giant has played by the rules, getting theatrical distribution as is required for awards qualification. However, the hostility between Netflix and the powers that be has continued, as typified by con director Terry Fremo's comments to Variety ahead of the 2018 festival. Netflix is welcome at Cannes outside of the competition. But by shutting out Netflix, Hollywood is also silencing marginalized voices like filmmakers Dee Rees, Julie Dash, Duvernay, and Najai, who, through Netflix, got their work presented on a global stage. As Duvernay, who directed When They See Us, tweeted, by the way, When They See Us, great miniseries, one of the things I value about Netflix is that it distributes Black work far and wide. I've had just one film distributed wide internationally, not Selma, not Wrinkled. It was 13th by Netflix. That was her documentary about the 13th Amendment. That matters. The Academy's choice to shut out Lionheart from the Best International Film category is not only a slight to African cinema, it's a snub to Black women filmmakers across the diaspora who are being told yet again that they aren't good enough. Najai's Lionheart powerfully displays Igbo and Nigerian culture without centering on war, rape, colonization, or genocide, elevating the experiences of Nigerian women who are still chipping away at pervasive sexism across all industries. This is Nigerian representation at its finest, and to suggest otherwise is a disturbing act of colonization over a film industry that has thrived independently for decades. Well, that is Armide. That's her article. And thank you very much for letting me read this article. I'm sorry I butchered many of the names. But again, I think this is a very, it's the kind of thing that we can all rally behind. At least I can rally behind it because it's in my wheelhouse. You know, I don't know a whole lot about a lot of political issues. And when I do try and find something out, of course, I go to I do try and read about them. And I think that from my perspective, as a genre film fan, as a world film fan, as just a fan of the art of cinema, I would hope that the Academy would reconsider and allow Lionheart to compete for the 2020 Best International Film Oscar, because it's the right thing to do. The Academy made a mistake, and I hope that they rectify it for all of us, not just for women in Nigeria, not just for the Nigerian film industry, but for everybody in the world. They look to Hollywood. People still look to Hollywood, to the Academy Awards, to see what movies that they're going to recognize. Now, there's no guarantee it's going to be one of the top contenders or even that it's going to win an Oscar, but I hope that they reverse their decision and they allow this movie to compete in the Oscars where it belongs. So therein ends my sermon. And now for a change of pace. Now, Amir B has written to me before. And normally when people send me letters, I've been getting a lot of letters. I know I'm behind. But if you send me letters at the Burnettwork.net, my website, I will eventually get around to reading them. I'm not going to read. I can't read. Not every letter is something that I will share on the show. And some letter writers have been writing me tons of letters, And I've read a lot of their letters, and still some people get upset when they don't get all of their letters read. Well, I try and change it up. And I like to hear from different people. Anyway, this one comes from Amir B. And while he didn't say that I could necessarily read this, he didn't say I couldn't either. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Hi, Rob. I watched Apocalypse Now this weekend, still jaw-dropping after all these years. But I don't want to talk about the movie or the story itself. Watching the movie again made me think why this movie, which ages now almost 40 years, looks better and has more verisimilitude than 99.9% of all movies that have come out in the last 20 years. Has the replacement of practical effects by CGI affected the legacy of modern cinema? Nowadays, most movies rely on CGI for most of their action set pieces. I understand its appeal. While not exactly cheaper, CGI is particularly convenient. Some movies develop an entire piece using CGI and others use a combination of both. But no matter what, they never reach the verisimilitude of classic movies. Additionally, I've been annoyed by another recent use, or the result, I've been annoyed by another result of the use of CGI. I call it the shining effect. Modern CGI just looks too clean, too neat. It doesn't look real. These are even true for movies that use CGI very well. Disney remakes come to mind. For instance, look at Aladdin. Watching it, I never felt the dirty atmosphere that the cartoon had. The city looked like a miniature studio set with CGI landscapes. Another example is Dark Fate. Knowing Tim Miller, I guess he did a lot of practical effects, but my God, mixing those with CGI just made action fake and too clean. Batman v Superman is another example that comes to mind. Even though they had an actual Batmobile, every scene the car is in looks like CG. The thing I've noticed is that as time passes, the movies that rely on CG too much look worse and honestly lose the rewatchability value, at least for me. I can't get past the awful CGI-heavy third act of Black Panther. The first time, I enjoyed it because I was excited about the movie. However, the second time, the CGI was just jarring, especially that last fight, which took out any sense of verisimilitude out of it. Watching Apocalypse Now last night, I'm still amazed at all the wide helicopter shots. Upon rewatchability, the classic movies pre-CGI look even better and age like fine wine. Action scenes in Aliens, T2, Saving Private Ryan have more verisimilitude and look better. Plus, they don't have the shiny and glossy feel of CGI-heavy movies. However, nowadays, the majority of action movies are CGI-heavy. I know Christopher Nolan is one of the few directors that intentionally avoid CGI as much as possible, and to me, this has caused his movies to age well with time. Dunkirk was breathtaking in scope, and I still think Inception had the best action in his filmography and one of the best in the past 20 years. Just compare the Joseph Gordon-Levitt fight with the assassin in that hallway, which actually looks built, it was, versus the end fight of Black Panther. One looks great every time, and the other looks jarring after just one viewing. This makes me wonder, will big CGI-heavy action movies have a legacy as big as the old classics? Personally, I don't, but I'd love to hear your take. Thanks, and keep up the great work, Amir B. Well, as you all who have watched this show for quite some time probably know, when someone says verisimilitude, I jump. I do. I love this topic. I'm obsessed with this topic. And for those of you who don't maybe know or are new to the channel, because I have a lot of new subscribers, and I want to thank you all for subscribing, what is verisimilitude? Well, verisimilitude, simply put, is the appearance of reality, the appearance of being real. And my obsession with movies, I know I haven't made as many as I probably should have, not for any lack of trying, but I like to create verisimilitude within the proscenium of the frame. So when you're watching a movie, what you're trying to do is make people believe. Now, even if you're making an epic science fiction film, Amir points out Aliens, for instance. Now, you could go and people would say to me, well, Rob, Aliens has some shoddy miniature work, perhaps. It's also got some wonderful miniature work. It's got some rear screen projection work when the dropship crashes and things like that that betray verisimilitude. Well, basically, Aliens was a $100 million movie made for less than $20 million. One of my favorite stories, my friend Charlie de Lazarica would have to confirm this, but at the beginning, when the prospectors cut into the Narcissus, the Nostromo shuttle that they find after it's drifting 57 years through space with its two occupants on board, Jones the cat and, of course, Ripley, when they open it up, there's a laser that comes in and scans the inside of the ship. And through the smoky environment, that laser, it looks very, very cool. That was not a post-production laser. That was a laser that was shot practically on set. Well, I heard that producer Gail Ann Hurd, who was at the time Jim Cameron's wife, she said, look, we don't have it in the budget to bring in this kind of a laser. If you want to pay for it yourself, Jim, be my guest. And he did. So what verisimilitude does is, even if you're making a science fiction epic, you're making a superhero epic, you can utilize, whether it's miniature photography, whether it's practical photography. I think Starship Troopers, although I have to say I haven't watched it in a while, I was very impressed by the use of miniature work and the CGI creatures, the giant insects, the bugs in that film. The daylight attack on the outpost, I think is it on Klendathu? The daylight attack on the outpost is still, that whole movie, the visual effects are some of the greatest ever done. Now, yeah, there are practical effects too, and they're intermingled. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But everyone is striving for peak verisimilitude. Now, here's the thing. It's very difficult, say, for instance, if you tried to build a practical Tyrannosaurus Rex that moved, that walked as fast as a Tyrannosaurus Rex could. It's very difficult. So you have to rely on CGI. And I will say this, as far as CGI goes, I think one of the greatest uses of it ever was in the first Jurassic Park. Because yes, there was a combination when they find the ailing Triceratops. That was a Stan Winston built practical full-size Triceratops. And using that, it breathes, using air bladders and the technology of the day, very convincing. However, the first time you see that brachiosaur, the Shilrin in the distance, when you see all the dinosaurs first in the movie when they're over in that water, that little lake, and then, of course, as they get close, amazing. Now, here's where I think things go a little bit awry. Now, when you're making a feature film, a lot of the visual effects are handed over to first a pre-visualization department and then VFX artists themselves who finish the previs. There's a long pipeline for these shots, and some shots, many shots actually now, are entirely CGI, completely generated in a computer. Now, one of the really interesting things about Jurassic Park, if you go back and take a look at it, Spielberg is a master. He's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. But one of the things that he has, I think his great gift, is he instinctually understands where to put a camera and how to move a camera in order to get the best result possible in every single shot. And if you look at how Jurassic Park is shot, what's really interesting about Jurassic Park is Spielberg had been using the widescreen frame, 235, whether it was Close Encounters, 1941, Jaws, Raiders, Temple of Doom. He was a big fan of widescreen photography, which is, of course, or in the case of 4K, 239:1, meaning for every unit long, and there's 1, 2, or 3.39 units to every 1 unit wide, the frame is. Spielberg was a master of that. But when you're dealing with dinosaurs, he went back and used the 185 frame, which is more rectangular. And he did that because he needed that frame size to use to convey the CGI and practical dinosaurs. That was an actual choice. And if you look at how Spielberg shoots Jurassic Park, especially, for instance, like when Sam Neill when they get out of that Jeep and they walk up to see the dinosaurs, you'll see that the camera goes very low and it accentuates how tall the dinosaurs are. And it's the actual camera positioning that adds to the verisimilitude. So when you have foreground elements that are actual human beings and a daylight dinosaur, it helps establish verisimilitude. It's where the camera is placed. Now, this requires a very sure hand. This requires a director to really understand how to employ visual effects and live action photography to best create verisimilitude. It is not easy. It is not easy. When Gareth Edwards was directing Godzilla, what he did in the first American Godzilla after Roland Emmerich's, the 2014 Godzilla, the way Godzilla was shot, and they made a conscious choice to do this, a lot of the time when you saw the mayhem, it was shot at street level. The way people would look up and see Godzilla, that added to the effect, that added to verisimilitude. Now, what happens is when you see movies, there's something that we know psychologically in our subconscious. We're not usually aware of it, but we understand in our minds somewhere that movies are fake. You know, what we're watching is not real, and that all movies are captured by a camera. So in our minds, we understand. Some people are more aware of this than others. But when we're watching movies, the camera has to be someplace. And what the CGI world allowed us to do was remove the camera, even though now it's a virtual camera. It's not, there's no real camera there. But when people were then unfettered by the constraints of a physical camera, and you could have a camera in virtual space, you could do shots that were impossible from a real world camera perspective. Now, one of the things that was a result of this, if you can have a camera whip around space battles and you could show shots that could not possibly be photographed by real human beings with a real camera, even if you were in space. And what I mean by this is obviously there's not cameramen out in space, but the approach to these things, even when you were shooting miniatures, say when they were shooting Star Wars, when Star Wars was being shot, they would look at old World War II films like the Dam Busters that sometimes were a combination of live action, stock footage, or miniature work, but they were emulating what existed before. So in our minds, we know that, okay, we understand these X-Wings are miniatures and the Death Star is a giant miniature, and we're watching these ships battling over, but the way that they were shot, we're still in the physical space. Even though they were miniatures, there's still people behind the camera shooting them. Well, what happens is when you're using the virtual camera now, where you can spin around at any axis, the X, Y, Z axis, you can have a camera make moves that are as fast as you want. Suddenly, verisimilitude tended to go out the window, especially in films, not older, but 90s films, early 2000s films that relied heavily on visual effects, because everybody was like, let's do camera moves that were impossible to do if you were constrained by the real world. But what happened with that, a byproduct of that, unfortunately, was that suddenly the tricks that film directors and cinematographers would use to make us believe were no longer being used. So you would look at things and be like, suddenly you're watching whip pans and you're watching camera moves, and they weren't real anymore. And we, in our minds, we know that they're not real, so they're not as impactful. They don't work as well on our subconscious or on our consciousness. We know in the back of our minds, we don't believe as much. Now, that's going to change as time goes by. You know, there are kids today that never grew up with Valley of the Gwangi, and they grew up in a world where Jurassic Park already existed. So when they go back and try and watch, say, a Ray Harryhausen stop motion animation film, whether it's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms or Earth versus the Flying Saucers, or my favorite, the skeleton battle at the end of Jason and the Argonauts, or a Sinbad movie, they're not going to believe in that either. They're going to see the strobing of stop motion, and that's fakey, Dad or Mom. I don't believe that. It is a perception issue that is constantly changing. And there's a lot of people now, and especially with video games, same kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff going on that, unfettered by having a physical camera, a virtual camera, you can do anything. You can show anything. You can move cameras back as far as you want. One of the great examples of my mind that a shot that I wouldn't have done, but I think it works, is in the Two Towers when we're at Isengard and Saruman says, "To war!" And there's that great camera move where the camera pulls down and right through the orcs. Well, it's moving too fast and there's too many orcs. And we know that camera probably could never, if it was not a virtual camera, that shot probably could never have been done. But Lord of the Rings gets away with it. Now, there's a lot of people that can't get past the wigs or the makeup. I understand that's a whole different issue. But one of the things that Amir brings up is that all of Apocalypse Now, it was all real. There's not even any miniatures in Apocalypse Now. It was all real helicopters. When they were blowing stuff up, those are real explosions in real locations. And one of the reasons that Apocalypse Now works so well is even like I've talked about before too about filmmaking. If you have an over-reliance, and I saw this a lot when I worked at Full Moon, if you have an over-reliance on, say, a 50-millimeter lens, which is a pretty close approximation to how people see, a lot of filmmakers that aren't perhaps as technically adept or they're not as comfortable in their own abilities, at low budget, you see a lot. Well, you used to. It's a little different now. But there's a lot of stuff, a lot of medium shots shot with 50-millimeter lenses, which is basically how we see. Well, that's not exactly the most cinematic of things. But the way where you set up a camera, like even if you have a 50-millimeter lens, if you're shooting it basically at eye level, that's kind of boring. But you can set it down so it shoots up. If anybody saw the movie Call Me by My Name, Luca however you pronounce his last name, he shot that entire movie with one fixed focal length, one lens. He might have had spares of the lens, but he shot it with one focal length, meaning one lens size. Shot the whole movie that way. But it was all about where he put the camera. And it is you can destroy verisimilitude by keeping the camera up at eye level, where suddenly it's like, oh, you're watching a movie. I don't believe this. This looks low budget. So creating verisimilitude is a very difficult thing. But a movie like Apocalypse Now, the combination of combat-esque photography coupled with very beautiful Vittorio Storaro photography. I mean, it is peak. Apocalypse Now is peak verisimilitude, but at the same time, it's peak stylization, which is probably my favorite thing. Kubrick in Clockwork Orange, peak stylization. The Shining, peak stylization. Peak Kubrick, but also peak verisimilitude. Where he gets weird is with the acting. And I am very much a fan of that. But unfortunately, unless you're using very skilled people, when you're using a lot of CG, you can truly shatter verisimilitude. In the case of Black Panther, I think there's too much of it. Sometimes, if you're going to do the kind of effects they did in Black Panther, sometimes a combination of miniature work and CGI is better. But it depends on your budget, and those shots are difficult, and how can they do them? And there's less and less people that are effective miniature. You have to build miniatures. It's a pain in the ass. Now it's much easier, even though you need a lot of people, and it's not necessarily cheaper. It's much easier to do movies in CG. Anyway, I love this letter. Thank you for that. Let's see what I've got. Let me jump into the chat. I know that a lot of people have been sending me chats, and let me see them. Let me jump in. Oh, it's not that many. Okay. Sadhu's Screening Room says, loved Dr. Sleep. Rebecca Ferguson is the bomb. Yes, she is. I've been watching it. Rebecca Ferguson, the hat, Red Hat. What's her name? I forget her name in the book. She's amazing. Wearing Slash's hat from Guns N' Roses. Oh, can't wait. I'm going to see that probably later. Stubble McShave says, began Hyperion a bit late, but I'll be finished tomorrow. Well, Stubble McShave, our longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community, who is probably the world's biggest Wheel of Time fan, I really hope that anybody who's involved with, if anybody who watches this show that's remotely, tangentially involved with the Wheel of Time series. Somebody's got to get Stubble McShave an early viewing of that show, because boy, does he love that. But what Stubble's talking about is one of my favorite science fiction novels of all time, Dan Simmons' book, Hyperion. It was written as one book, but it was split into two, Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion. It has been described as the Canterbury Tales in outer space, but it is, so much more than that. So let's hear it, Stubble. I'm glad you love the book. It's so good. I hope you also have Fall of Hyperion so you can jump right in. Sujith is here. Sujith says, being from India, I feel for Nigerian films. It angers me, Rob. Same here when foreigners compliment me on my amazing English, not knowing the truth. Yes, because India is that exotic nation where everybody speaks Hindi. Nobody knows English there, do they? Mukbang Reviews is here. Thanks for your comments on camera angles and lenses. Very interesting stuff. I watched The Cincinnati Kid from 1965 and found it to be a wonderful film. Thoughts? You know what? Is that Paul Newman? I saw that movie once so long ago, I don't really remember it. But I'm a big fan of 60s cinema. Yeah, I mean, when I think 60s cinema, I'm a John Frankenheimer guy, but there's so many great movies that came out in the 60s. And you know, we saw the beginning of when everything exploded in the 70s, when studio filmmaking gave way to the indie, the auteur indie explosion of the 1970s. I mean, everyone who you go to film school and you learn the two great eras of American cinema were the 1940s and the 1970s. Now, this is not to slight any movies that have come out in the 80s, the 90s, or the aughts, or the teens. There's lots of great movies that come out. But we had the Hays Code and what the studios were making, and watching that transition from the 60s, the death of the studio film, and the beginning of the maverick auteur era of the 70s that gave us Francis Ford Coppola and Brian De Palma and so many other great filmmakers. George Lucas, Spielberg, all came out of the 70s. You know, James Toback, I don't know if he's a great filmmaker, but John Cassavetes, Woody Allen. I mean, there's just William Friedkin, Sidney Lumet. My God, the 70s, so many great directors. John Carpenter, heck, Kubrick did some great work in the 70s. But yeah. But thanks for that. Now let's see. I got some. Stubble has a letter here that I'd like to read, since I just read something from him. I'm going to read a letter from him, because why not, right? This letter, let me get in on this here. If it pops up, suddenly it's not popping up, and I don't know why. And I really like this letter, but for whatever reason, here we go. He writes, "Hi, Rob, a.k.a. Laser Bob. I thought I would write a letter about how there's so much good stuff, good content being produced now that you can't keep up. I thought I would pick a year at random and compare it to this year in the amount of good movies and TV series that were being produced. I picked 1988 at random as my reference year. But when I looked at that year, I realized that there was a lot of good stuff being done that year as well. There were two differences. The first one was that there was a lot less genre material being done back then. And the second difference was that there are a lot more TV series now that have replaced some of the movies. Very interesting, very astute observation. When you look at the movies of 1988, there were a lot of great comedies, a few action movies, some quality dramas, and a few genre classics. There were comedies such as Big, The Naked Gun, A Fish Called Wanda, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and Coming to America. There were action movies like Young Guns and Die Hard. There were dramas such as Rain Man and Cinema Paradiso. Genre movies mostly consisted of horror. There were some notable exceptions, however, such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Beetlejuice, and Willow. In recent years, there's been a shift more toward genre movies, especially science fiction, fantasy, and comic book properties, although we still get a lot of horror. We have more or less lost all the great comedies. If you look at the list of comedies in 1988, Big, Naked Gun, A Fish Called Wanda, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and Coming to America, those comedies were all great, and we haven't seen any comedies on that level for the last 5 years or so. Several of the premises for what would have been movies back then have now been turned into TV series instead of movies. But there's just as many properties now as back then, and that has resulted in a lot more content. I think that's the reason we sometimes feel like we can't keep up with all the new content. There's not more numerically, it's just that the content for each property is bigger and more expansive now because they're TV series on a streaming network. Today, I feel like I don't have the time needed to rewatch things. And it's the rewatching of things which makes you into a fan of that property. You don't become a fan by watching something once. You have to watch it several times. I suspect that in 5 years, people will hardly remember properties such as Stranger Things or Carnival Row, because even if we really enjoy them as we watch them, we don't have the time to watch it a second time, since there's always something new and interesting to watch. In conclusion, I miss the great comedies, and I think it will be more difficult to develop passionate fan bases for new properties that will last over time. I guess sometimes maybe you can get too much of a good thing. Thanks, Stubble. Stubble, I think you hit the nail on the head with this one. I mean, one of the things that I talked about this before, I show Elizabeth a lot of movies, and the movies I show her, I don't show her necessarily horror movies or dramas or comic book movies or cop thrillers or whatever. I show them just a random smattering of movies that I've collected over the years. And the movies that I've collected over the years, all kinds of movies from all kinds of different eras. There are movies I've watched literally dozens of times, movies where I've remembered entire passages of dialogue. And Elizabeth is always bemused when sometimes we'll get to a movie that I particularly love that she doesn't know how much I love it. But she's always bemused by me just randomly rattling off. And I don't do this often because it's quite frankly fucking annoying, but I'll randomly just rattle off a whole exchange in a movie. And I think she's always bemused by it because sometimes there's no reason, like she wouldn't know that, of course, you can recite Star Wars from beginning to end or Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan from beginning to end. But it's amazing to me that you can rattle off some of Sunset Boulevard or most recently, Mommy Dearest. Elizabeth and I watched Mommy Dearest. It was late night too. I don't even think she'd heard of Mommy Dearest. I saw Mommy Dearest 4 times in the theater at the Cinerama Theater in Seattle. Now, I don't know why, because it was about old Hollywood. I thought the whole thing was very interesting. And I liked everything about Mommy Dearest, even though it's totally a camp classic now with a great over-the-top performance by Faye Dunaway as Joan Crawford. But I think Elizabeth was surprised at how much of the movie I could just recite. Now, I've watched that movie countless times on home video as well. It's just one of those movies that for whatever reason, I just love it. I do. And there are other movies like that. Actually, I would say there's probably, like I've said this before, but I'll probably say a different number, but there's probably around 50 movies that they're diverse. Sure, there's Star Wars and Star Trek II, but also movies I've watched countless times, like All About Eve or To Live and Die in L.A., horror movies like Rosemary's Baby and Dawn of the Dead and The Exorcist and things like that. But there's also, sometimes like Almost Famous is a movie that I really, really love. I think I love that movie maybe more than anybody. And, and Stubble's absolutely right. I've watched these movies over and over and over again. And one of the things that I think Stubble really nails about our world today is that there is so much content. As you whip through content, you're in and out. Whereas movies are sort of, maybe they're different. Also, it's hard to watch a streaming series over and over and over again. Like, I just watched the second season of Jack Ryan. I thought it was okay. I thought it was a little lazy. I thought they leaned into Clear and Present Danger too much. They repeated a lot of the beats from that film, even though the overall idea behind Clear and Present Danger was different and far more. The new season of Jack Ryan has a really compelling idea about emerging markets and how they're being exploited by the superpowers, and it's sort of moved away from that. And I was really surprised by that. I thought it was going to be much more than it turned out to be. And while I liked it, if I had to equate, as far as there's 5 Jack Ryan movies, but it's the 4 originals as Hunt for October, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and The Sum of All Fears. Patriot Games is actually my least favorite of those movies, and I would say I think this season of Jack Ryan, while enjoyable, was definitely for me at a Patriot Games level, whereas I definitely thought the last season, the first season, while it was a familiar story, it was definitely maybe Sum of All Fears, which is my third favorite of those movies. Shadow Recruit, the one with Chris Pine, it's a movie where basically it's set in 3 rooms. Not a big fan of that movie. I was really disappointed by it. But I wanted to see them do Cardinal of the Kremlin. You know, that could have been great. But I think, Stubble, you're right. We don't have those relationships anymore. And I think, you know, here's a theory. Here's my theory about Star Wars. Yep. Here's why. Now, there are some people that The Force Awakens was their first Star Wars movie in a theater. Remember, Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005. Now, 10 years later, you got a whole new generation, and if you saw saw Force Awakens in a theater, it was your first Star Wars movie in a theater. But I think one of the problems with Star Wars, the new Star Wars, is its rewatchability factor, in that it doesn't have much of one. And if you're an old Star Wars fan, I go back and I watch the original Star Wars, and especially Empire Strikes Back, which I've seen, of course, 26 times in theater. I am delighted by Star Wars throughout. I love all the exchanges of dialogue. I love meeting the characters. I love everything that happens in Star Wars. And it's also become so iconic in our culture. Whereas there are no scenes in Force Awakens that I look forward to, because I just, you know, for whatever reason, that movie has no verisimilitude to me, whereas Star Wars does. To me, especially the original version of Star Wars has peak sci-fi verisimilitude. When the special editions ruined all that, but it did. Peak Star Wars verisimilitude is as embodied. It is in the original Star Wars to me. And I love everything about the original Star Wars, because I just buy it. It's so delightful. From the first time C-3PO opens his mouth. Did you hear that? They've shut down the main reactor. Or there'll be no escape for the princess. I don't remember. Okay. Something like that. There'll be no escape. Did you hear that? They've shut down the main reactor. There'll be no escape for the princess. That's a lot. Did you hear that? They've shut down. Will be destroyed for sure. There'll be no escape for the princess this time. Whatever. I mean, I can't remember every movie, but that's the first lines of dialogue in Star Wars, and it's delightful. It's delightful that when you meet C-3PO, you realize he's paying attention. He's like, he might be a protocol droid, and he might not know he doesn't know as much about the rebellion as R2 does. Clearly, what I think is one of the funniest things about Star Wars is when you meet R2 and 3PO, clearly they're together, they're inseparable all the time. But nobody bothered to tell C-3PO what's really going on. Only R2 knows what's really going on. Like, R2 knows about his mission. R2 knows he's got the Death Star plans. R2 is a spy. He lies to people. I mean, he can't, like, if somebody hits a button or he's got a restraining bolt and he plays Princess Leia's thing, you know R2 is thinking, oh, shit. And he's trying to figure out, how can I turn this message off? And then when the restraining bolt comes off, he makes it go away. And R2's like, I don't know, man. Old data. I mean, R2 is a baller. That's why R2-D2 is so awesome in Star Wars. He knows exactly what's up. And C-3PO doesn't. And that's how come they work so well together. You know, they get captured or whatever. C-3PO is like, I don't know, man. I'm a protocol droid. Yeah, well, I don't know what's up. And R2's like, all I do is beep, boop, beep, boop. You know, and he knows what's up. R2 is like the baller. R2-D2 is the James Bond of protocol droids. And he never, how he has been ruined, or let's say not used, how, I understand J.J. Abrams and Disney doesn't make money off R2-D2. They make money off BB-8. I get it. But you know what? The way R2-D2 has been dealt with in this sequel trilogy is one of the great misuses of, when everyone talks about Rose Tico and how woke everybody is or whatever, what makes me most angry about the new Star Wars movies is what they've done to the James Bond of astromech droids, R2-D2. I mean, my God, R2-D2 from Star Wars. Go back and watch Star Wars from R2-D2's perspective. Just do it as an exercise. Go back and watch Star Wars and look at what R2 is doing. And I mean, it's so brilliant. it's so brilliant how they play him, because he's the one person who's undercover the entire movie. He is the James Bond of astromech droids, and he's not going to give anything up. He's not going to let anybody know what he's thinking, and he's way ahead of you. It's so great. But yeah, I agree with you, Stubble. I think, unless you watch something over and over and over and over and over again, and now we live in a world where, like, I loved Netflix's Sex Education with Gillian Anderson. I thought it was a wonderful show. I watched it. I was delighted by it, but I couldn't tell you one line of dialogue. I have a vague memory of it because you're in one series and out the other. It's you watch things. I mean, Jack Ryan season 2, I watched it a week ago. It's a distant memory. And in a way, like you pointed out, our love for movies, if you became a movie fan, it was because you did watch movies over and over and over and over countless times. And I've always maintained that the people in the movies, whatever your favorite movie is, whatever characters they're your friends. Like I watched The Godfather to hang out with my buddies, the Corleone family. They're one of my favorite families. I like to hang out with them. I like to go on tour with Stillwater. Now, every time I go on tour with them, it's the same tour, but I forget how much I enjoy it and get back into it. I'm William Miller. So I think you're right. And I think in a way, all of this content is diminishing the fan experience because there's so much to keep up with. And then not only that, if you're a newly minted fan, you have to go back and catch up with the classics. And how can you do that when there's so much new and interesting CGI drenched awesomeness coming down the pike? Hard to do. But what, great letter, great point to make. Let's see what we got here. First of all, let me see. I don't know why my computer's been it's been acting up. I've been pushing it to the limit. Sister Harrow is here. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? If you guys haven't ever seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, you got to watch it. A friend got me into these old movies. She can quote the whole movie. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Now, before I get this wrong, I think is it Robert Aldrich? I think it's Robert. Is it Robert Aldrich who directed Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Yes, it's Robert Aldrich. It was nominated for Best Actress. If you guys haven't seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, speaking of Mommy Dearest, it's Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, man. And if you didn't watch that series about them, you've got to watch Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Some people would call it a camp classic. I'm not one of them. I know it's black and white and it came out in 1962, but you need to watch Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. So, Sister Harrow, good on you. I love that you have a friend that can recite the whole movie. That's because you should. Zachary King says, Rob, have you listened to the official Watchmen podcast? Lindelof explains his thinking behind his version of Watchmen. Are you going to finish the series? Yes. I mean, I can't wait to hear what Lindelof thinks. I did like the third episode quite a bit because, it was actually dealing with Silk Spectre, which I really liked. And there's a lot of stuff here. I still feel that this new Watchmen series, and I'm quite enjoying it. I can't wait to see tomorrow's episode. It's like I'm sitting in on a conversation with a bunch of people from my drama club in high school that knew they were the coolest people in the room. And they've made a show that is so self-consciously clever that it is, to me, so pretentious and annoying so far. Although I really did like what's going on. Although there are things about it that we'll see. I certainly don't think I do want to hold off. Look, I watched The Leftovers. And The Leftovers, there's all kinds of things that really made me annoyed about The Leftovers, even though I'd read the book. And this hasn't got there yet. I'm interested. I'm enjoying watching it. It depends where it's going to go. I think episode 4, I'm going to watch all 9 episodes because The Watchmen's one of my favorite things ever. But I guess the word is smug. The show feels very smug to me. And here's the thing. If, in fact, Adrian Veidt is in some pocket universe that's been created by Dr. Manhattan, and they say to he says the landlord and all these things, to me, I'm like, okay, you're going to hold off, and that's going to be a reveal. But to me, that kind of mystery box reveal is annoying because who else would the landlord be? You know, when Adrian Veidt finally puts on in the last episode his Ozymandias costume, okay, he's Ozymandias. Like, well, who else is he going to be? And it's annoying. I find that it's kind of like Westworld. You're watching this show, and these reveals become to me more annoying than anything. It's just you're withholding pertinent information. I get it. But it's a false reveal. It's not like a plot machination so much as that you're just not being given the information that a normal story would give you. And they do that in place of actual plot contrivances. And I mean, contrivances not like they're contrived, but I hate this kind of storytelling. To me, it's very smug. And it's also you're turning these revelations into revelations without necessarily adding to your narrative. Rather than have a really interesting narrative, okay, let's just hold off this information, and the revelation of information becomes a narrative plot point, which seems to me sort of disingenuous. But I know it's hipster and cool, so let's do that. But we'll see. I'm enjoying it. I should listen. Well, look, I love Craig Mazin, and knowing Craig Mazin, at least in the past, I like Craig Mazin. I think he's a smart guy. I know he hosts the podcast. I have not listened to it yet. I should listen to it. I really want to listen to it, and I will catch up. I'll probably do that today. But yeah, it's. We'll see. I'm not going to not watch the episode. But Zachary, thanks for asking. Willow Yang says, speaking of Baby Jane, have you seen Feud? Feud is awesome. I knew nothing about Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, but I love the series. Willow Yang, you need to watch Mommy Dearest. And if you want to know something about Bette Davis, All About Eve. All That Jazz and All About Eve. It's my favorite movies that all begin with the titles begin with all. You got to watch All About Eve. It's one of my favorite films of all time, probably top 5 of all time. Joseph Makowitz, one of the best screenplays ever written, the greatest acting. George Saunders, who when you first meet him in the movie, he plays Addison DeWitt, one of my favorite favorite names of any character ever. Addison DeWitt. He eventually killed himself. I think he was fed up with humanity. But George Saunders in that role. Watch that movie because it's so very good. I enjoyed it so much. Mukbang Reviews is back. I think you skipped my previous super chat, R.E. Dr. Sleep. Did I? Oh, I did. Mukbang Review says, did you see Dr. Sleep? I haven't, but I'm curious. Also, love Mommy Dearest, an amazing film. Lastly, Judd Apatow was on Bill Maher on HBO, and somehow Prince was mentioned. It was hilarious. # Pop Life. Well, I need to get on that, Mukbang. Rick Berg says, the Kinks have a song that came out in November 1972 that everyone should give a listen to, and it covers the film industry, called Celluloid Heroes. Wow, I missed a lot. I don't know why I missed these super chats. There's lots of super chats that I missed, actually. I know Celluloid Heroes. You need to listen to that. Yes, indeed. Nice poll, Rick. Nice poll. Mukbang Review says, it's Steve McQueen. That's right. Cincinnati. Of course, Cincinnati Kid is Steve McQueen. What a douche I am. It's Steve McQueen, a card-playing film I happen to find on Netflix. Paula Bowlers would like your thoughts on The Shining. We know it's not your fave Kubrick. I really like The Shining a lot. Again, it's a Kubrickian adaptation of Stephen King. It's not my favorite Kubrick because I really do think that The Shining is Kubrick's. It's really his only genre movie. It's a B horror movie directed by Stanley Kubrick, which makes it A-list, top of the line. And it's a movie that takes place, if you watch it, mostly in brightly lit environments. And a lot of people criticize. Stephen King famously criticized the film because he said, well, people after on the heels of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is odd because people think that Jack Nicholson, how crazy he was. The whole point in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I think, is that he's not crazy. He's put into a lunatic asylum and he's not crazy. But because The Shining came out after One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, everybody looked at The Shining and Stephen King did and said, you know, it's not like a normal guy who descends into tormented alcoholism or whatever. It's a guy who's crazy from the get-go. Although I don't necessarily believe that, but no, I very much enjoy The Shining. I do. You know, as here, I enjoy The Shining enough that I had to bust on the, of course, Blu-ray Steelbook for the 4K, which, you know, who doesn't want to do that? You got to have the 4K Shining because it's awesome. Anyway, I am a huge fan of The Shining, and I can't wait to see Dr. Sleep, which I'll probably go see today. So there you go. I'm sorry I missed anyone's super chats. I don't like to do that because I very much appreciate you supporting the channel. Anthony Gonzalez says, it says, have you ever heard Kevin Smith's Prince story? Yes, and I love Kevin Smith's Prince story. Kevin Smith talks about how he was once going to make a documentary about Prince. I mean, it doesn't paint Prince in the most flattering light, but it's on YouTube. You got to listen to it. It's great. Incredible TC says, I'm Nigerian. Igbo is pronounced Igbo. Igbo. Oh, okay. Man, I'm really sorry how I brutalized all of Nigerian names. So Igbo, I would never have known that. The G would mess me up. Igbo, okay. Been a fan since Heroes and Discovery Season 1 after show. Also a big fan of your of your character on the Schmodown. Well, Incredible TC, thank you. Thanks for, I love hearing from a Nigerian about my podcast today. That's great. And I thank you for being an old school fan. I very much appreciate that. Yes, it's funny because there are people that don't know that I do this podcast that watch the Schmodown. And they're like, wow, you know, you're really different than your character on the Schmodown. For those of you who don't know, there is a thing called the Movie Trivia Schmodown that I've been involved with for a long time. And when I first started, it's a movie trivia contest that's also based around wrestling. And when I first started, I was pretty good at it. Like everybody that would do it, it was extemporaneous. It was whatever we knew off the top of our heads. And I was the first Inner Geekdom champion. But nowadays, everybody studies. There's no way. There's no way I could, unless I'm playing Dagnino. So I crossed over to be a manager as the players got better and the questions got better. And so I have a character that I play that's very loud and self-centered and egomaniacal. And it's a lot of fun to play. It's definitely a character. But when people tune in and watch this show, they're like, that watch a Schmodown, they're like, wow, you're very different than your character on the Schmodown, but which is true. But I want to thank you, Incredible TC, for writing in. I very much appreciate that. That's interesting. Igbo. Okay. Gosh, do you have any favorite? Are there Nigerian films we should check out? I'd like to know more about Nigerian cinema. Anthony Gonzalez already asked me about the Prince story, which I shouldn't read twice. Ishmam Faisal says, hi, Rob. Did you receive my email recommending a book? It's a nonfiction graphic novel. The author is Brian Kaplan. Would love your review of it. I might have. I don't think I've gotten to it yet. But if it's a nonfiction graphic novel, I love nonfiction graphic novels. But yeah, this next letter comes from Jason DeWolf. Hi, Rob. I'm officially a new member of the Post-Geek Singularity, and I thought I'd introduce myself. I'm a 44-year-old male living in Southern Ontario, Canada, and was a good Canadian kid, as John Campia would say, and was bred on some of the most classic movies as far back as I can remember. I didn't get to the show much as a child, but my mom would let me stay up and watch all sorts of great movies for 5 to 7 years on the old 8 o'clock movie. Jaws, Rocky, King Kong from 1933 and 1976, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Superman, Close Encounters, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The Shining, The Birds, The Goodbye Girl, Carrie, etc. Most of those are still in my top 20 to this day. I, too, was fed a healthy dose of Star Trek reruns, creature feature movies on Saturday afternoons, and loved the late 70s Spider-Man TV series back then. Since we're in the period of time Blade Runner took place now, and since I don't know your view on this, I thought it would be a good time to bring up the movies, its different editions, and Rick Deckard. I may be in the minority here in the community, but I actually prefer the international version of the theatrical cut. I like the noir voiceover, and I absolutely reject that Deckard is a replicant. Let me stop you right there and say, you, sir, you and I, we park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. Although I do like the notion that he could be, but not that he is, for all the reasons that people on this side of the fence say he's not, which of course includes the point of the story from the writer Philip K. Dick, screenwriter Hampton Fancher, art director David Snyder, and the two key actors of Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer. By the way, when I was making Free Enterprise 2, or Free Enterprise The Wrath of Shatner, Blade Runner art director David Snyder was my production designer, which was another tragedy that the movie never got made. Of course, Scott was the director, and apparently he likes that angle more, but it does indeed diminish the point of the story, the lessons learned by the characters, and the depth of their interactions. It's funny, the first time I ever saw the origami at the end, I never thought it was a reveal of him being a replicant, simply a representation that Gaff viewed Rachel as a rare creature, and he was letting her and Deckard go. And that's how I could continue to see it. I also love Blade Runner 2049. Director Denis Villeneuve has stated he prefers the theatrical cut too and considers it a masterpiece as it was. And although he hasn't outright said it, he seems to lean into the human camp, which seen from this perspective makes his movies more compelling as well. Spoiler coming, a human impregnating a replicant and that offspring becoming coveted and feared. Would have loved to have seen Denis do one more with what happened next and an uprising of replicants. Too bad more people didn't go to the show for that one. We as likely would have, before we would have go to the show, for that was the one we would likely have got that movie. Afterwards, can't even read. Anyways, love the channel and would dig hearing your thoughts on this if you haven't already done so. Jay Canada. Well, Jay Canada, first of all, welcome to the channel. Welcome to becoming a member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I completely agree with everything you said. First of all, let me offer a shameless plug. Last year, a book that came out last year at this time that I contributed to, the Cyberpunk Nexus, exploring the Blade Runner universe. It's a big, thick trade paperback tome that I would recommend to anybody who enjoys Blade Runner. I wrote an essay in that book about the summer of 1982 and the box office of Blade Runner. But there are many great articles, essays, think pieces about Blade Runner comics, the sequel novels by K.W. Jeter, what Blade Runner means. There's a piece on Blade Runner 2049. It's a really, I mean, if I do say so myself, I hadn't read it before I got the book. I'd only known my own piece that I wrote, but it's cheap. You can get it on Kindle. It's on Amazon now. The Cyberpunk Nexus, exploring the Blade Runner universe. Really, I think it's a great book if you like Blade Runner. And I contributed an essay to it. To me, Blade Runner is the original international version. Now, the original, when people say, a lot of people don't know this, but when Blade Runner was first released on video by Embassy Home Entertainment, Embassy Home Video, it was the international version, and the international version had more violence in it. And I believe I don't know if it's different when Deckard or when Rutger Hauer is killing Tyrell, you see much more blood. And when he says, I think he says, I want more life father instead of I want more life fucker, which, you know, people get into that. I prefer that version. The home video version of Blade Runner that has, they don't advertise for killers in a newspaper. You know, that one. Sushi, that's what my ex-wife called me. Cold fish. That to me is the definitive Blade Runner. All of this stuff that came out later, to me, it's fine. Blade Runner, the final cut, it's fine. They fix things. I like what Charlie helped do. Charlie de Lauzirika helped do. I love all versions of the movie, but to me, the definitive version of the movie is to hear the voiceover, because it is that noir detective story, and it is like a throwback to a Dashiell Hammett tale. And it's my favorite version of the film. I prefer it because even when I watch the director's cut or the final cut, I hear the narration in my head. And there's a lot of interesting stuff about the world and hearing Deckard's musings and things like that. And I totally agree with you. I think if Deckard is a replicant, the movie doesn't nearly pack the wallop that it packs, especially at the end of the film. this idea that Deckard's I don't think that works at all. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Denis Villeneuve, obviously, I love Blade Runner 2049. However, I will say this. I was talking to Brian Fuller. We were having a chat, and he was talking to me about how much that movie is hated in the LGBTQ community and what it has to say about women and reproductive rights and all kinds of things that I'd never considered before. But I guess as a white, cis, middle-aged male, I'm going to say I love Blade Runner 2049 with all my heart. And I do believe the whole idea of that film, that a human and a replicant procreated, again, it harks back. That's where a lot of the Cylon stuff from the reboot of Battlestar Galactica came from. And I believe that. Everything that you said about Blade Runner, I completely agree with. If he's a replicant, I think that just came out later. I don't know if Ridley Scott actually believed that when they were making Blade Runner, because it diminishes the story as a whole, really. The whole point is that he, as a human being, comes to realize that replicants do indeed have a soul. I mean, if you don't, if as a human being, listening to the speech, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I've seen C-beams glittering in the dark near the Tannhauser Gates. All those moments we lost in time, like tears in the rain. It doesn't mean anything if Deckard's a replicant. What it means is, where it has its weight, is that Deckard recognizes as a human being that a replicant, these machines, these created entities that he's been hired, his job is to retire. He is confronted by the fact that although they are manufactured beings, they do indeed have a soul. That's the whole point of the movie. And at the end, when Deckard is saved by Roy Batty and he hears this speech, when he's sitting there in the rain watching Time to Die, we as the audience, we realize that it has been an egregious, what we have done, creating the slave class of people that we've doomed to a 4-year lifespan, is a terrible, terrible thing. And these are beings with rights, and they have wants and needs, and they can love and care for anybody the way we can. Just because they're manufactured, they are real. So I want to thank you for that letter. That's a great letter, man. And I agree. We park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. So thank you for that letter. Yes. Sub McShave's back. He says, reveal of a plot mystery should be like a great illusionist revealing a magic trick. You shouldn't see it coming. If you do, it's a crappy magic trick. Oh, I completely agree with you. This whole weird magic box way of telling stories is annoying because you're just waiting for it, and you wait for these reveals, and it's they give you these clues along the way, but they're intentionally obfuscating things, and I'm like, okay, I'd rather you concentrate on a much more interesting plot. I mean, Watchmen, if you read the comic, is pretty straightforward. Yes, there is a mystery plot. There are things happening, and it is revealed later what's happening, but it's a story that's unfolding like a classic noir mystery, really, and a science fiction story. And it's weird. Suthia says, hey, Mr. B, Cambodian horror is quite terrifying. Yes. It is. And there's a movie, I forget the name of it, or maybe it's Indonesian. I think it's Indonesian. There's a movie, I don't even know the name of it off the top of my head, but it's supposedly some sort of a possession, evil spirit movie that people say is quite terrifying, and I don't remember the name of it. But yes, there again, whether it's the Indonesian market, the Cambodian market, again, emerging film powerhouse markets that are making great genre movies that I'm looking forward to seeing. The more the merrier. Bring out those voices. Suthius also says, to me, verisimilitude is very subjective. Thoughts? Well, yes, I think in a way it can be subjective. And I'll tell you, Lord of the Rings is a perfect example. There are people that will just never buy into. They can't, like my mom. I've talked about how my mom lacks imagination. My mom is a very pragmatic individual, and it's hard to get her to like flights of fancy. And when I do, it always surprises me why she does or doesn't like things. But there's a lot. I had friends that they hated Lord of the Rings because they couldn't get past the wigs. They just thought the wigs didn't look real. You know, Gandalf's white wig. Sure, I can't get past that. So in a way, you're right. Verisimilitude is subjective. However, I don't think watching a movie like Apocalypse Now, unless, of course, you're a veteran and know that they've gotten something wrong, but a movie like Apocalypse Now is kind of a phantasmagoria in itself about wartime. But you're right. There are people, look, I bought into Crimson Tide. I like Tony Scott's movie Crimson Tide. If you were a submariner that ever worked on a submarine, an American nuclear submarine, you'd be like, there's so much this movie doesn't get right. And so if you actually knew about it, you'd be like, eh. And that's true. So verisimilitude is subjective, but I do think that there's an overall verisimilitude that most people can buy into. But definitely verisimilitude is subjective, Theus. I absolutely believe that, and you're right. You're right for pointing that out. Mukbang Review says, what are your thoughts on failed comics? I read the New Universe. Okay, let me read this whole thing and get back. What are your thoughts on failed comic books? I read the New Universe, Marvel's New Universe from 1986 to 89, and I enjoyed some of it, but make no mistake, it was a failure. Justice, Cyforce, DP7, and Starbrand broke my heart. Thoughts? Well, don't forget the great Marvel comic that was part of the New Universe, Kickers Incorporated. What? So for those of you who don't know, there was an attempt in the mid to late 80s for Marvel Universe to create a new universe with new characters that was not constrained by all the continuity of their ongoing Marvel Universe. And it just wasn't that good. They had some people like Starbrand, I think didn't John Byrne work on Starbrand at one time, but they just weren't very good comics. And yes, Cyforce, Justice, DP7, Starbrand, Kickers Incorporated, they just weren't very good. I never like it when a comic book doesn't work. I think there was a DC miniseries. It was supposed to be a 12-part miniseries called Sonic Disruptors. That was like it was a rock and roll sci-fi thing that I was buying that they never finished. And I always hate that. You know, there's a really interesting comic that is borderline incomprehensible called Thriller. That Trevor Von Eden worked on, and it was another DC series from the early 80s, early mid 80s that I was fascinated by. Barely made it. I think, did it make it to 12 issues? It was just a very crazy series. I don't like it when comics fail. You know, I like it when they finish their stories. I never like reading a story and in midstream it gets cut off and you never get to the end of it. So that bothers me. But yeah, the New Universe, I bought some of them, but they just weren't that appealing. You could tell they weren't appealing. Like how, I think it was under Jim Shooter's reign when he was editor-in-chief of Marvel. How did they think that, oh yeah, we're going to put out these comics in the wake of the Avengers or in the wake of the Defenders or in the wake of Spider-Man. I mean, we're going to put out Justice, a superhero comic about justice. Okay, sure. It was just a little ill-conceived, I think. Ill-conceived from the get-go. Willow Yang says, since the chat was talking about burgers earlier, what's your favorite burger chain in the States, and what is the most overrated? Well, I have to tell you, Axonar's Alec Peters got me into this burger chain. There's only like two in Southern California called Freddy's. It's a steak burger, and you can get custard there, and it's a lot like Steak Shack and that kind of thing, but I love Freddy's. Freddy's burgers, I don't know what they season their meat with. I don't know, but I love Freddy's. I think it's great. And of course, I do like In-N-Out Burger here. But in terms of burger chains, also Steak Shack is great. Five Guys is great. But you know, I think my favorite fast food chain burger, and we're talking, when I say fast food chain, Steak Shack has the smokestack. The smokestack. I love that burger. But in terms of, this might be a controversial choice. I really like Jack in the Box. Yeah, as far as burgers go, I like their ultimate bacon cheeseburger. It's big, it's beefy, and I gotta say, when I grew up in Seattle, we did not have Carl's Jr. We didn't have it in Seattle. When I go visit my grandparents in Palm Springs during the winter months, when I'd go for spring break every year and visit them, they had Carl's Jr. and they had the Western Bacon Cheeseburger. And I'm a huge Western Bacon Cheeseburger fan. And one of the things that was great about moving to Los Angeles was I could eat Carl's Jr. And again, it was a substantial burger. So those are burgers that I like. I mean, so it's a toss up for me if I'm thinking about going to get a burger and there's no In-N-Out around. It's Jack in the Box and Carl's Jr. and I like them both. Then that's for the main. That's for but you know what? I'll say this: I do like Wendy's and Burger King too, but I will gravitate toward Carl's Jr. and I will gravitate toward Jack in the Box. I like the bacon potato wedges at Jack in the Box too. So yeah, but I mean, Five Guys and Steak Shack also good. But I think if I Freddy's, I don't know why Freddy's. I love Freddy's. I love that steak burger. And again, I Alec Peters and got me into that, and Jack Morrissey. He's a big fan too. He's a big fan of Freddy's. But there's only like two, and they're nowhere near me. I'd have to drive like 45 miles to get to the nearest Freddy's from here, which is kind of a bummer. Although we would do that. Alec and I working on Axonar, we would drive to Freddy's a lot. He'd be like, hey man, let's go to Freddy's. And we would take like a pilgrimage, and then he would go to his favorite Warhammer gaming store. So yeah, I don't know. What's the most overrated burger? Now, I gotta say, people, I have never had a White Castle burger. I've never had one piping hot, new, and I've never had one of those frozen White Castles. Listening to Beastie Boys records, I'm like, I know I'm a terrible man for never having a White Castle burger. I've never had White Castle. I don't know. I mean, overrated burger. I don't know if there is an overrated burger. Again, I think Jack in the Box is an underrated burger, but I don't know it's overrated. I don't know. Because, if I have an underwhelming burger, I just slather more barbecue sauce on it, and then it's even better. I'll put barbecue sauce on anything. I love barbecue sauce. So there you go with that. That's an interesting. I wish I'd got in on that. Chick-fil-A. Suthia says Chick-fil-A all day. Now, the Polynesian sauce, though. Now, I have to tell you, it is controversial because Chick-fil-A is obviously a very Christian company. They're closed on Sundays, and I don't begrudge that. In-N-Out Burger also is. They've got, if you look at In-N-Out Burger, which I love, at the bottom, they have Bible verses quoted on the bottom of their cups. I believe the extra large, it's John 3:16. And so the LGBTQ community is not a fan of Chick-fil-A, but there is a Chick-fil-A right down the street from my house. And I got to say, Chick-fil-A is delicious. It is delicious. And I really do like Chick-fil-A a lot. And when I go there, they have many choices, and they bring your food out to you. It's a fast food chain that brings their food out to you. So I can't get enough, but I try not to patronize them as much because, maybe my patronage, they're right next to Pasadena City College, so they're doing just fine. Anthony Gonzalez says, do you have a Mel's Diner in SoCal? Yes, we do. We've got a couple of Mel's Diners. We have one up on Sunset Boulevard, and we have one in Hollywood. I like Mel's Diner. They do have good burgers. And Bob's Big Boy, but Bob's Big Boy and Mel's, those are, to me, if this makes sense, more meat and potatoes burgers. They're not extraordinary burgers. They're good, serviceable, hearty, but ordinary burgers. But yeah, they're good. They're good. And, I do like gourmet burgers. I like going to high-end restaurants or restaurants that, Umami Burger. I think Umami Burger, I like Umami Burger, which we have here. Another good burger, but they're always too small for me. They're not big enough. Who has a pretty good burger that I like is, and now I'm drawing a blank on it. It's one of these brewery chains that we have here. BJ's. No, it's not BJ's. BJ's is pizza. Why am I drawing I'm drawing a blank. There's one in Burbank, and they have a pretty good burger. Thick burger, a lot of barbecue sauce. Yeah. And I'm sure, I don't know. I'm sure Texas has some incredible barbecue burgers. There's probably great burger joints in the South, burger joints that I don't know. As I get older, I have to eat less and less burgers. It's sad because I love burgers. I do. Now let's see if I have more good letters to read. This is a good letter. I'm going to read this letter because it's a good one. Let me take a glass of a sip of water first. Hello, Mr. Burnett, a.k.a. Master of Fun and Wonder. This comes from, by the way, Luke Gosling. I've been meaning to write to you for a long time about so many subjects, but most of my thoughts get covered by the knowledgeable viewers anyway, so I thought I'd contribute with something more personal and hopefully inspirational. I'm a long-time listener, but first-time caller, all the way from Lincoln in England, only a stone's throw away from Terry over in Nottingham. Now that city is a great night out. I've enjoyed your YouTubing since Collider Heroes, and the Burnettwork is my daily go-to for insightful movie talk. Also, your Lord of the Rings and Superman documentary works are some of my favorites. Why, thank you. I should point out, the Lord of the Rings documentaries, while I participated in them, it was done by a great team of people. There was about 30 of us total, and everybody pulled their weight. The Lord of the Rings documentaries are the culmination of the great team at Curdy Pellerin. So many good people over there. And what was fun, I'll tell you something. Everybody loved working on those Lord of the Rings documentaries. It was a fine couple of years going back and forth to New Zealand and going to London and sitting down. I got to sit down with Christopher Lee for 5 hours. I mean, I have nothing but fond memories. And I still, to this day, I think those Lord of the Rings documentaries are some of the best movie documentaries ever done, especially that were done specifically for home video. So thank you for that. I stay saying sane with my tongue firmly in cheek. This is a thank you to you and the Post-Geek Singularity community. Many moons ago, I trained as a model maker, with my main interest being special effects models. Dude, that's a dream job for me. While getting my degree at university, I built a 1-to-1 scale replica of R2-D2, a proton pack, 2 hoverboards, and Scaramanga's golden gun. I'll have to send you a picture. I entered that field because the making of documentaries like yours, which gave me a deeper insight into the behind-the-scenes working on film, and showed me it was a job option I never knew I could achieve after the lackluster career advice from school. Can I just say that the model makers at Weta were, those people were amazing, both men and women, by the way. It pains me that we will most likely lose this supplementary material once physical media is gone, but that's a rant for another day. However, for a number of boring reasons, I didn't pursue it as a profession, but it ignited a dormant creativity within me. Flash forward, I hooked up with an old friend of mine, and we set up our own production company, Bearing 305 Productions. It's a Lost reference, and began writing and directing short films. Our sci-fi short, Athena, which was a neat little time loop story, played at the Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival. From there, we have put our efforts into producing a feature film. At the end of 2018, I quit my job of 12 years in an unrelated field to give my passion for storytelling a full-time go. With the support of my very understanding wife, I've spent the last year polishing some feature scripts and writing a children's fantasy novel. That's rad. At this time of sitting at a computer for 8 hours a day trying to write and not go insane like Jack Torrance, I have listened to your excellent show every day and have thoroughly enjoyed the wide-ranging, balanced, and lively chats. The imagination connoisseurs have given me much to think about with differing points of view and put films on my radar I never knew I'd love. Their passion, along with yours, has kept me going in the times when I'm banging my head against the brick wall, struggling for some much-needed inspiration. So, thank you. To wrap up this waffling, on November 5th, my debut feature, which I co-wrote, directed, produced, and financed, a micro-budget indie folk horror film, Blood Myth, is released in the U.S. on DVD and streaming. Dude, huge congratulations. Huge congratulations. What an accomplishment. It took 4 years from script to audience, a long process, which you're all too familiar with Tango Shalom. By God, yes, I am. Good luck with that, by the way, and I hope to watch it soon. I've by no means made it, But the point is, I've gained inspiration from hearing similar stories and hope this gives others the impetus to give it a go. Me and my filmmaking partner are two small-town guys with no connections, trying to break into an industry we love, just wanting to tell interesting stories. I just want to say for others who are in a similar position as me, trying to chase the dream, believe in yourself, your project, and persevere. Rob, if you'd be so kind to share the trailer to Blood Myth, I feel it might be a film your community would enjoy. You can also follow us at B305 Productions or 305productions.co.uk. Would love to hear any feedback from those who watch the film. Hope to join you guys in London for Bond 25. Thanks for everything you do and keep up the good work. It would be great to work with you one day. I will be listening tomorrow and the next day and into the future, trying to stave off insanity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can go to the website where this letter is posted, and that's Luke Gosling, and the link to the trailer is in this letter. So first of all, Luke, massive congratulations to you. One of the great things about the world today that we live in, look, we might not all be getting rich off of our movies the way we would like to, but there's more outlets to show them. We can control our own distribution whenever we want. And it's amazing that you did this. So huge congratulations to you and your partner. I can't wait to go back and watch your trailer right now. And it's really, it's amazing that you've done this. And I want to thank you for writing in and thank you for the kind words. I very much appreciate that. Look, you know, I've often talked about The Hills Run Red took 3 years for us to make. And Agent Cody Banks was a big pain in the ass, and Free Enterprise was a pain in the ass, and Tango Shalom has been a pain in the ass. The movies that I've worked on, big studio productions that have millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, are probably the easiest films I've ever seen get made because people can just sit down and concentrate on the making of the movie. They don't have to worry about where their money's coming from or where they're going to be able to shoot next week. Or some of my favorite movies too, like the original Phantasm. It took Coscarelli years to make that movie. He shot it on the weekends, and I dearly love those films. And you actually did it. You accomplished it, and it's out there. So kudos to you. And I'm really tickled that you'd write in, and I'm glad that we here at the Post-Geek Singularity community have kept you going. And I think that's amazing. So thank you for that. And everybody go check out this letter on the website. You can read it where the link to the trailer is in the letter. And I think it's great. And remember, the movie is called Blood Myth. Blood Myth. Luke Gosling. Check it out. There's some good ones here. John Suntress from the Word Balloon podcast is here. He says, are you watching For All Mankind on Apple? I am liking it. No, for those of you who don't know, this is my next thing that I can't wait to see. For All Mankind, which is an alternate history story about the world that we would live in and what happened with the space program if the Russians indeed beat us to the moon. It's an alt history story that was co-created by Ron Moore of Star Trek The Next Generation and, of course, Battlestar Galactica fame. It's one of the launch shows on Apple Plus, or is it Apple Plus, or just the Apple Network, which I have yet to get around to watching. I want to watch the morning show. I'm not so interested in C unless I read that it's incredible, but I'm dying to see For All Mankind. I have not watched it yet. And for those of you who don't know, John Suntress has the Word Balloon podcast, and whenever you can, you should check out his podcast, the Word Balloon podcast. He has an emphasis on comic books, but he does pop culture interviews with a lot of people. They're real deep dive interviews. You never know. They're usually really rollicking conversations. John is a conversationalist. He is a cunning linguist himself. He is a great conversationalist and has great talks with many different people on a slew of subjects. So go listen to the Word Balloon podcast. Anthony Gonzalez said, ooh, this is a good one, Anthony. Director's cut or theatrical cut for Forman's Amadeus, Milos Forman's Amadeus. I love Amadeus. I love it, love it, love it. I actually reviewed it for my high school newspaper. I love the film. I might have to go theatrical on Amadeus, but if memory serves, I don't know if the theatrical is on Blu-ray. I think only the extended version is on Blu-ray. Although I like the extended version too. It sort of diminishes certain things that happen in the film. If you guys haven't seen Milos Forman's Amadeus, Milos Forman also famously directed One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He directed a version of Dangerous Liaisons called Valmont. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. I love Milos Forman's work. You have to see Amadeus. I know it's a mid-'80s movie. It might seem like it's boring to you. Tom Hulse plays Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And also you have you have one of the great performances, F. Murray Abraham, because kids love F. Murray Abraham. F. Murray Abraham plays Salieri, a composer who is jealous of Wolfgang. It is such a wildly entertaining movie. Basically, Wolfgang's like a party. He's like a rock star. He's a partier. He's a party animal. And Salieri is this. He pores over all of his compositions, and he knows he's not as talented as Mozart. The film is so good on so many different levels. It's beautifully made. There's a reason why it did win the Oscar. It was based on a play by Peter Schaffer. You got to see it. You got to see it. If you haven't seen Amadeus, do yourself a favor. Go get it. Watch it. You will love it. Mukbang Review says, I admire you and all who present an independent film. It's hard enough to produce a still shoot. I am in awe and appreciate your work. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully you'll see more of it. I'm having a problem. I'm trying to upload Skyfighter to this portal to Dust, and it's a 26 gigabyte upload. And every time I upload it, I've been trying to upload it for 2 days. The upload doesn't work, which is very frustrating. So that'll be the next work that you will see from me is Lucas Kendall's 15-minute short science fiction film called Skyfighter. And Skyfighter was done as a proof of concept for a larger feature, but I think as a 15-minute short, it works in its own right. I think it's pretty good. I'm very proud of the editorial work I did on the film. It's very clever what was done, what Lucas did with very little money. And it's basically set in a two-man space fighter bomber during a galactic war, and things aren't what they seem between these two people. And the visual effects were done by Tobias Richter, who I worked with on the Axanar, on Prelude to Axanar, and the aborted Axanar feature film. Aborted because we got sued. But Tobias did all of the visual effects work. There's some really great stuff that he hadn't done in Axanar. He did a lot of live action work. There's holograms on the ship and the plane. You fly by hologram in the plane in the space fighter. And I'm really excited. And that'll be coming out on the Dust YouTube channel and the Multimedia Network beginning in January. So that is the newest project I have coming out. It's a short film, but it's pretty neat. And I think it's a movie that all of you at the Post-Geek Singularity will enjoy. Once again, Skyfighter coming from Dust in January, a little over 2 months. So it's nice to have something come out, that you can watch. And Tango Shalom will be finished. I just don't know. We've never shown it to distributors, so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with that. But thank you for the encouraging words, Mukbang. That's very nice of you. Suthius is back. Suthius says, Morgan Freeman and Edward Norton have been on Star Talk. I love deGrasse Tyson brings on actors to talk about the science side of the actors. Look, I love Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm so glad he was exonerated over his own Me Too moment. Of course, I will always love Neil deGrasse Tyson for coming to our Starship Smackdown panel, sitting there for 90 minutes and standing up and defending the original Starship Enterprise in a tie decision. I mean, he's a national treasure, and I love what he does. There's not a lot of people out there that are making science cool, but he is. I've always thought of him if Lando Calrissian was an astronomer, he'd be Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I think it's great what he does. And Star Talk is very fun. I mean, that's a talk show, a podcast that he does and brings in a number of different luminaries, not just actors, but all kinds of interesting folk. It's definitely worth checking out. Squidward Tentacles says, I think you missed my super chat earlier, R.E. Joaquin. You know what? You're probably right. I probably did. And I knew that. I didn't know that. So I'm glad you said something. Squidward Tentacles also says, did you see Joaquin's podcast with his sisters? I think it was the first time he talked in depth about Joker. If so, did it change your thoughts on the movie? Listen, I have not. I didn't know he did that. I will go listen to that. I'm fascinated, especially now that Joker's become one of the most successful movies at its budget level ever made, and certainly the most profitable comic book movie ever made. I mean, it's going to make $1 billion, which is just astonishing and great. No, I have not heard that. So I'm going to go listen to that, Squidward Tentacles. And by the way, Squidward Tentacles is a great name. And I want to thank you for supporting the channel. I'm sorry you had to do it twice, but I thank you for doing so. I very much appreciate that. Yeah, I definitely, that is definitely something to go and read. How interesting. This is another, this is a letter from a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community, Tim Down Under. He comes from a land down under, or as we all know him, Timbula. I think I'm saying it right, or is it Timbula? I just say Timbula. Maybe it's wrong. It seems like it's Timbula, the spider monkey, but it could be Timbula. I just say Timbula. It's probably something I'm not even, it's over my head. I'm sure it's a reference I should know. Greetings, Rob, your friendly neighborhood spider monkey here. It's been a while since I last sat down and composed a letter for you and the rest of the Singularity to mull over, so here's one for your consideration. I'm curious, what was the first movie you saw that made you truly fall in love with film? I remember the exact moment I became a cinephile. It was around lunchtime on a Sunday in 1981. I was 5 years old, and my father ran into the family lounge room where I was plastered to the floor in front of the television, a TV guide in hand. He said, "Quick, change the channel." I wasn't overly fond of this idea, as I was watching some rubbish early 80s cartoon and playing with some Star Wars toys my elder brother had left lying around, so I protested. He told me I would not regret it. Boy, was he right. What he had me tune into was a midday matinee of 1963's Jason and the Argonauts. I was glued to the screen. I couldn't get enough. When it was over, he asked me if I liked it, and when I excitedly told him I was, he said, "Well, next week, another movie like this is opening at the cinema, Clash of the Titans." Those 2 days are two of the earliest memories I have of spending time with my father, doing anything other than watching him get ready for work or sleeping on the couch when he got home because he was so exhausted. We bonded over movies. He's the one who introduced me to my hero, Groucho Marx. And that bond is something that we still have to this day, although he's much less discerning in his tastes nowadays. He's happy to watch any old crap that is playing at the time on his cable TV. I've set up Netflix for him and tried to show him how he could access a vast collection of good movies, but nope, he's happy watching generic rubbish. Oh well, can't win them all. So what movie did that for you? I'd love to hear yours and other members of the Singularity's answers. Until next time, here's another Groucho Marx quote. "Those are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I have others." Timbula's spider monkey. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Tim. I've said this on the show before, but I never tire of saying it. The first movies that made me fall in love with movies were George Pal's. Actually, there were three. There were three that I saw all the time. War of the Worlds was the first, When Worlds Collide, and Conquest of Space. They were 50s sci-fi movies produced by George Pal. I could not get enough of them. George Pal was the first movie maker whose name I remembered. I was about 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old, and I would watch these on Channel 11 on Sci-Fi Theater at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I loved Sci-Fi Theater, and Sci-Fi Theater is really what made me turn into a movie lover. All of this came about as my love of Star Trek. And the Twilight Zone. I would watch anything that had to do with science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and it really made me look through the TV guide. But I knew that Sci-Fi Theater was on Sundays at 2 o'clock. When I came back, I had to go to temple. I had to go to religious school on Sundays. Instead of going to church, I had to go to the synagogue where I had Sunday school. And I didn't come from a religious household. I think my mom felt she wanted me to be a good Jew, so I had to go to Sunday school. I couldn't abide Sunday school. I hated it so much. I learned to like it later, but it just, I felt that for me, if they had approached it more if they had read more of the Bible stories, I would have been more interested, but it was so stodgy. I hated it. But the best thing about it was I knew that when I came home at 2 o'clock, I'd get home about noon, 12:30. I knew I just had to eat lunch and Sci-Fi Theater was going to be on. But it was War of the Worlds that really changed my life. But then, of course, that did lead me to things like Jason the Argonauts, which I talk about on the show. And of course, you know, another thing that you can't get enough of, I got to see these Godzilla. By the way, this Criterion Godzilla set rules. I love the set. It's just the greatest thing ever. But I loved seeing these movies. I love seeing Godzilla movie too. But it was War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide, and Conquest of Space. Those three that did it for me. I love those movies so much. I mean, and what I'll tell you something about those movies. It showed me as a kid the world was also a dangerous place, which I liked, because in Conquest of Space, there's a guy, he's doing a spacewalk, and he gets hit in the face with a meteor. Like, I was like, whoa, like I'm a little kid. Not this guy got pummeled in the face when this meteor goes by and a micrometeorite hits him in the, oh man. And of course, in War of the Worlds, one of the things that made me love movies as a kid was I knew that I would see things in movies, even in War of the Worlds. And the thing that when I was a kid, the worst thing that I ever saw was in War of the Worlds, the Martians, they used their heat ray on a priest. And he's lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And then the pulsating, for those of you who've never seen the original War of the Worlds, it's going to be kind of hard to understand this. But the original War of the Worlds, still to this day, have the coolest adversary spaceships. I mean, they're actually tripods like the original, but you can't really see them, and they're floating on electromagnetic, like 3 electromagnetic legs. The tripods, or the Martian war machines, as they are called, in War of the Worlds, remain to this day the coolest yet scariest things ever. Like in my childhood, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark was like the scariest movie I ever saw, but make no mistake, I was terrified of the Martian war machines, but at the same time, I thought they were the coolest things I'd ever seen. Also, the sound effects, they have this, you know, this manta ray, this cobra head weapon on the top of, they also have wingtip disruptor beams or whatever they are, but they make your molecular, I guess they make the molecular field or whatever you want to call it unstable and you disintegrate. But the weapons in War of the Worlds, if you have never seen the original War of the Worlds, you can get it in 4K like on iTunes. Unfortunately, they did this beautiful 4K restoration where they even removed the wires that you could see on the war machines, but you can't get the physical media, you can't get the physical disc of War of the Worlds. But anyway, still to this day, the coolest, scariest things in sci-fi history. There is not a cooler, scarier thing than the manta ray shaped Martian war machines from the original War of the Worlds. But the sound that those weapons made, unbelievable. The sound of those heat rays are to this day in all of sci-fi film history, and maybe now it seems quaint if you've never seen it, but the sound effects of the Martian death rays were like the greatest things ever. And as a kid, you can't, you know, you like monsters. When you're a kid, the War of the Worlds war machine, the manta ray war machines, the golden and green war machines with their cobra head weapon, main weapon, is the coolest as a kid. And you could never get one. It wasn't until I have one now, but it wasn't until like 50 years later you could buy garage kits of them, but nobody made like the definitive giant Martian war machine model. When I was working on Star Trek, the Next Generation Blu-rays, some model maker, I don't remember his name, had molds. He had made Martian war machine a model. It was huge. I have a picture of me somewhere holding it up, and I wanted it so bad. He had the molds from the original from the 50s, but that was it, man. And when I thought, like, it was one of those moments as a kid, I remember watching, I knew when the Martians fried a priest that I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see at 5 years old. And I think that's what made me love movies. And then of course, War of the Worlds led to When Worlds Collide, and Destination Moon was a movie they showed. It was an earlier movie, but they showed it not as much. So it's Conquest of Space, which I actually saw before War of the Worlds. I saw Conquest of Space first. I saw War of the Worlds. Then I saw When Worlds Collide. And I recently, like within the last year, I showed Elizabeth When Worlds Collide. And it's surprising just how smart these movies were really smart. They were very smart movies. And I love them. But it was the original George Powell War of the Worlds that made me fall in love with movies. So maybe I've belabored that point, but it's a true one. It is absolutely one of my favorite things in all of the world, and it remains so. Stub McShave says, would love to have seen Mark Hamill play Amadeus on stage. I would like to have seen that too. I didn't know he did play Amadeus on stage. That is amazing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been 2 hours. Spock, it's 2 hours. You ready? It's been 2 hours, and I'm going to bring an end to Robservations chat number 271. But before I do, I want to say something. My 300th episode is coming up. Now, I'm going to have to do two. I can't miss a day for the next 29 days, and I'm going to have to do an extra episode within that time. But I want to announce that Robservations number 300 is coming. And for that episode, I'm moving out into my Imaginarium, although I found out we had a little bit of a wasp infestation this morning, which I'm going to have to now deal with. But Robservations 300, I'm moving my set. I'm going to have the opening Robservations theme song, which some of you have heard in various things. It's all going to change. I'm going to be in a different set. My action figures are going to be lit up. Everything is going to happen. I'm going to do a 5-hour show on Saturday, December 7th, which is also, I know, not to take away from World War II, a day that will live in infamy. December 7th of this year is the 40th anniversary of Star Trek the Motion Picture, the actual 40th anniversary of Star Trek the Motion Picture. I'm going to be doing a 5-hour, an all-day-long broadcast. I'm going to start at noon on Saturday. And I'm going to try and have guests. No, I'm going to have guests. I'm not going to tell you who they are yet, mainly because I don't know. But Robservations, I'm going to kick it into high gear. It's been 300 episodes. And that will also take me into December, which marks my 12th month, or will mark my 12th month doing Robservations. Robservations' actually year anniversary is also in December. Now, here's what I want to do. One of the things I'm going to have capability, like John Campea has, I'm going to have the capability of playing video packages during these live shows. So what I'm going to ask of the Post-Geek Singularity is, if you want to, and I'm hoping some of you do, I want you to send me videos of yourselves saying things. You can say hi, you can have a message for me, a message for the Post-Geek Singularity, but you got to keep them short and sweet. Just, shoot something on your phone, and I'll cut them together, and I'm going to put them into a package, a video package. I'm going to edit them all together throughout. And if you want to choose to send me something, by the way, like Mike Bodden, when I got to do that unboxing, you guys who have sent me things. Now, I'm not telling you should send me gifts. I'm not. But, I mean, it was fun to get gifts. So I'm going to do another unboxing with whatever people have sent me. And I want to hear from you. So send me in videos, and you I guess we'll figure out, the website, and I'll if you hit me up through the website, I'll be able to give you a link, or I can download something from you, WeTransfer or something like that. However you want to do it, I want to hear from you. I want to make the 300th episode of Robservations something special. It's going to be on Saturday, December 7th, celebrating the 40th anniversary of Star Trek the Motion Picture, but also the 300th episode of this show. And it wouldn't be anything without the Post-Geek Singularity community. So I would love to do that. And I'm going to see, if somebody wants to call in and be live on the show. Any of you letter writers, I want to do that. But I think it's going to be great. And I'm going to, unless somebody uses profanity or nakedness, although, let's be fair. If you want to send in something when you're doing something nude and illicit, it'd be interesting to see. Maybe I could do something funny with that as well. But I leave it up to you. Got to keep it clean for the family audience. Got to think about that YouTube algorithm. But so December 7th, 2019, the 300th episode of Robservations, I'm going to get there. But I am going to have to do an extra show now and again to keep it going. And I can't miss any shows either. So if I have work like I did yesterday, I'm going to have to make it up. So, ladies and gentlemen, Robservations, episode 300, everybody. And even if the moderators want to send in something, it's going to be a great day, comrades. We sail into history. So there you go. I want to thank everybody who continues to support the channel in every way, shape, and form. It's going to be exciting. I can't believe it, but I'm going to make it more worth your while. Actually, Suthia says, will you be watching the new War of the Worlds on BBC? Excited? Yes, there's two different War of the Worlds. There's the Victorian era one, and there's their modern day one with Sam Neill, right? He's in it. Cannot wait. I love me some War of the Worlds. You know, the Spielberg War of the Worlds, the first 20 minutes is one of my favorite things ever, when the Martian war machines are revealed and Tom Cruise is kind of a deadbeat dad. I love that. Rick Berg is here. The Martian war machines were depicted awesome as the ground burned when the beams touched the ground, the way Dr. Forrester got excited as he explained it to the army. Just saying. Yes, you know, I love that, Rick. And yes, the Dr. Clayton Forrester. First of all, what was so great about that is if you look at these movies like War of the Worlds, the main character, the hero is like an egghead scientist, you know, and it's great stuff. It's so good. If you haven't seen the original War of the Worlds, do yourself a favor and watch it, because by the way, the colors are beautiful. It's really interesting to watch. It's just so much fun. But think about what the Martian war machines were like to audiences of 1953. Man, they would have loved that. They would have loved that. By the way, I went to a 50th anniversary screening of War of the Worlds when Patricia Neal was there. And I'm telling you, it was good stuff. But yeah, so anyway, I want to thank everybody who watches the show today. I want to thank everybody for the ongoing support. It's always great to have that. You can still go to the website whenever you want and send me more letters and all of that. But I'm going to end this chat. Robservations, the show about something, Robservations chat number 271 is going to come to an end now. Once again, I'm your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. Thanks for being here. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, as always, have a better day.